Hey singers, it's Laura. Welcome back to the weekly warm-up where I share clear, fun voice education to help you improve your singing and enjoy it more. Today we're talking about audiation. What is it? It is simply hearing notes or musical phrases or whole pieces of music in your head. And this may be something that you're not aware of yourself doing. Maybe it's something that you're doing at a very high level and are not even aware of it. But for most of us, it's a skill that we can build. And the reasons we might want to do that are so many. Having a strong sense of audiation will improve your tuning. It will improve your ability to consistently sing difficult phrases correctly. It will help you to sing more expressively. It will help you to be more confident in rehearsal. It will even help you overcome performance anxiety. So this is a skill that has really transformed my musical life. Unfortunately, I had a strong audiation skill. I lost it and I had to really rebuild it from the ground up. So today's video is going to be a little different in format than my normal videos. I recorded this intending it to be one of my quick 10-minute videos, and by the time I finished, I had over an hour of footage. So I have a lot to say. I'll try to edit it down so it's not that long. But this is not going to be just pithy nuts and bolts. I'm going to tell you my story, explain in depth how you can use audiation in your practicing, how you can grow that skill, and how it can help you with all of those things I told you about before. Now, if you prefer that shorter form content, I will put a timestamp down in the description box so that you can just jump to how to practice for audiation. But I really would encourage you to think about this, especially if you're someone who is thinking about working to make music at a sort of higher level of expertise, potentially even professionally. Unfortunately, my loss of audiation was absolutely the result of my conservatory training. And so I want you to be aware of that so that you can avoid the same thing happening to you. So let's get into it. I'm so excited for you to learn more about this subject because I think it's a huge benefit to you, to the people you sing with, to your audience. So let's get started. Because audiation is a mental phenomenon, you can't see someone doing it and say, oh, hey, Chuck is audiating right now. I think many of us have no awareness that we are or are not doing it. And I think it's also easy to assume that everyone does it the same way. I remember as a kid watching the movie Amadeus and being so amazed at the scenes where Mozart would just think of music and then write it down without playing it on the piano first to know how it sounds. That seemed crazy to me. And I think also at that time, I thought that he was a genius and I couldn't do it. And I've come to learn since that in fact, audiation is a skill that you can develop and also, unfortunately, that you can lose. Here's my story. As a kid, I would learn music by hearing. The same way that most kids do. I would pick songs up at camp or in church or at school, and I would know how they go. This idea of being able to know how a song goes without looking at the music or hearing it played to you is audiation. So if I asked you to recall how Old MacDonald goes, you probably could, even though I bet you've never seen a score for it. And you probably, to a certain extent, can hear it in your head. When I got to high school, I started taking voice lessons with a teacher who insisted that I learn movable do solfège. And I've mentioned it before here on the channel. I think it's a great skill for singers to develop because by giving a syllable name to each step of the diatonic scale, it helps to orient you in the scale. It's like a map for your audiation and for your voice so that you can know I am in this key, and therefore I know where the landmarks are. I know where, and also I know notes that are not part of this scale. It helps you to sight read by helping you to kind of orient yourself within the scale, but it also builds your ability to audiate, to hear the scale as kind of a unit. So I feel like probably by the end of high school and as I was going into college, my audiation was at its height. And I had, at that time, a reputation as a very good sight reader. I felt like I could really sing in performance pretty freely. And then, dun dun dun, I went to conservatory. Now, I'm not here to badmouth my conservatory education. I learned so much. I had a great time. But two important things happened that really, I think it's not too dramatic to say, killed my ability to audiate. And this is where I really want to share a little cautionary word for those of you who are moving into advanced musicianship, potentially on a professional track. Number one, at my conservatory, and this was really, I think, across the board, the way that it was back in like the 1990s, early 2000s, and it may still be this way now. There was an enormous bias against listening to recordings to learn your music. We were told that it was amateurish and that if you were a real musician, that you should take your score and go into the practice room and learn it yourself. And unfortunately, because I did not have the keyboard skills to sit down with a Schumann song or much less like a Berg opera and play the whole thing for myself, I started just picking out my line on the piano. I no longer had my teacher really making sure that I was always doing it with solfège, so I abandoned that practice and I would just learn my line by picking out notes. Now, it might sound like that is learning by ear because I'm playing the note on the piano and then internalizing it. But what I'm missing is the whole context. And so my idea of how a song would go was one individual thread of melody rather than the accompaniment, the other voices, everything kind of encircling it. And so I started to really listen to music in the world and kind of in my brain as one single melody line. At the same time, I also was developing more and more sophistication in my vocal technique. This was great. It was awesome that I could do tricks with my voice that I could not do before. My range extended, my breaks got more even, but I did it all through really micromanaging what was happening in my physical body. And a lot of this stuff is important. A lot of it is exactly what I teach you. Put your tongue here, raise your palate this way. Unfortunately, though, there was so much of that information. I was so eager to learn so much of that information that I got to a point where in the early days of my professional performing career, every time I stepped on stage to perform, 90% of my brain space was consumed with trying to just direct and micromanage every part of my physical body. And then that leftover 10% that was reserved for like pitches and notes and expression was really only trying to hang on to that one thin line of melody. And everything that my colleagues in the orchestra and the other singers were doing was like a distraction. And I got to a point where performing was really an ordeal. It was mentally exhausting. It was mentally terrifying. And worse yet, I was giving performances that I was not proud of. I always felt that I was insecure in the notes that I was singing, and I was never happy with my technical performance because there was just too much for me to actually think of and control. So that's my story. I was at rock bottom and I really had to start intentionally rebuilding my ability to audiate from the bottom up. So if you are looking for practical tips, this is where you should start, and it starts with just the simplest thing imaginable. I would play a note. I would hold on to it in my head, try to hear it in my head. Sometimes even this was hard. And then I would sing it back. And then maybe I would wait longer or play other notes in between, like. So I would sort of build up the challenge, but I was still going from this kind of rudimentary level of not creating a note in my head, but actually hearing it and holding on to it. Even so, this ability to concentrate on a note for a long time and hold it, even if other stuff was going on, was a big upgrade for me, because now in a choral rehearsal, when we were given a cue pitch, I didn't have to be one of those people who has to hum to keep my pitch. I could just be quiet, hear it in my head, and come back with it. So right from the start, as soon as I started working on this, I started to feel more confident and see real world results. Next, I started to work on creating notes that I hadn't heard out loud. And this, for this, I really used what I knew would work for me, which was that movable do solfège. So I went back to the Concone School of Sight Singing book, page 1, bar 1, and I started rebuilding my familiarity with that map of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's the scale, that's the map. I started, as I moved through those exercises, I started to be able to orient myself, to know which pitches were not even part of the scale, so I wouldn't even guess them, to know like which notes were higher, lower, how far away they were. And as my map became more and more detailed, more confident, I started to be able to do things like hearing this pitch out loud, maybe thinking this is do, and being able to hear in my head, this is mi, this is sol, this is also sol. So I started being able to actually create pitches in my head. And now, again, I'm seeing more benefits in my rehearsals, because let's say we're doing sicut cervus, right? Maybe we're doing it in A, I don't know. Some people will be traumatized by that idea, but if the first voice enters here come the altos, and then I'm a soprano, so I know that that's sol, and I'm gonna be coming in on do, on sicut cervus. Well, I don't have to be nervous, even though my discrete pitch is not played for me at the start. I don't have to hear it and hold on to it. I can just, as I hear the other voices coming in, I can hear in my head that this one's gonna be mine. And that was such a confidence builder. Now I can start to move to the more advanced skills in my practice. And I call them more advanced. There's no reason why you can't start working them right from the start. But what I started doing now was using my ability to hear series of pitches in my head to help me perform difficult passages correctly without practicing them over and over and over. So let's say you're trying to sing Maria, right? That first interval is very challenging. It's a tritone. And what a lot of us will do is that we'll just start by trying to sing it. Marie. Oh, I was too high. I'll try again. Marie. Oh, I was too low. And then you try it again. And we end up making mistakes, either just kind of randomly or worse, over and over again. And every one of us has had the situation of having an ingrained mistake that is really hard to stop making. And so in order to avoid building up that muscle memory of doing things wrong, I started taking little cells, 2-3 notes that were challenging, and insisting that I had to be able to hear them in my mind correctly before I would sing them out loud. This took a lot of discipline, but it saved me from practicing the wrong notes over and over and over again. So I would try to hear that clearly in my head. And for a long time, again, I heard nothing, or it was really fuzzy. But after a while, I started hearing clear as a bell, bum, bum. And at that point, I knew if I can hear it, I can sing it correctly. And I can not only sing it correctly once, but over and over and over again. So this is where I started getting into mental practicing. If you want to go deeper with that, I would highly suggest that you check out Molly Gebrian's book, Learn Faster, Perform Better. It is awesome. I think there's even an audiobook now, but that's a whole other subject. But this little like cellular application of mental practice and audiation has saved me so many mistakes, because once you can hear it, you can do it correctly, consistently, and that is an amazing upgrade. So at this point, I had already seen huge benefits from just being able to hold on to a pitch and then create another pitch within the rubric of the diatonic scale, thanks to my movable do solfège. But it didn't stop there. I started using this skill simultaneously while I was singing. So this might seem kind of crazy, but as I was singing out loud, la, 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 I was not listening to the sound of my voice coming back in the room, but actually simultaneously creating the pitches in my head. And what this allowed me to do was to create a mental ideal version of whatever I was singing as I was singing out loud. You might remember that when I was talking about my story, I was saying that I got into this technical paralysis where my whole brain was just consumed with micromanaging every tiny thing I was doing while I was singing or performing. And this really was like a complete change, a complete 180-degree turn, because now rather than telling my body how to do it, I was just giving my body an ideal and just saying, create this, and then kind of letting it happen. Now, I still did need to practice technical adjustments, but for the overwhelming majority of the things I was trying to do, I did not need that micromanagement. All I needed to do was to say, produce these pitches in this way, here's how I hear them, and then my body would do them. So the benefits here started to really pile up. First of all, tuning. This was enormous. All of a sudden, I could hear exactly how I wanted it to go. And like those difficult passages, if I couldn't hear it clearly, then I couldn't sing it in tune. But once I was able to hear it clearly, I could absolutely reproduce it in tune so much more successfully. I also started to be able to do this with expression. I could start to think about exactly how I thought a phrase could go. Maybe I would imagine the shaping of one of those beautiful phrases in Sicut Cervus, right? All those leaning and moving notes. And rather than telling myself, this one short, that one long, then crescendo, then raise your palate, I was just hearing how I wanted it to go, and then I would create it. Now, this was kind of a trip because I was focused more on what I heard in my head than what I actually heard in the room. But I would experiment with doing this and recording myself, or when I would use it in performance, I got such great feedback, both from what I heard on a recording and from what my colleagues were telling me. Hey, you sound great on that, or I loved what you were doing there. And I was able to really create what I heard in my head while doing it simultaneously. So again, the way to work on this is just to do it. And I would start not with those super hard passages, but with something very simple, like, can you sing a 5-note scale? And focus on what you hear in your head, not what you hear out in the room. La, 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 la. It is really tiring for the brain, again, but in my case, it was good to have such an all-consuming job for my brain, because if I was thinking about how the sound should sound, I was not thinking about 40,000 technical things that I should be doing and was not able to accomplish. Now, at this point, I want to introduce you to a really fascinating exercise or game that you can use if this feels crazy to you. It may be hard for you to think, how would this ideally go? That's kind of a loaded phrase, but there is an idea called the Batman effect, which is basically that if we kind of put on an alter ego, we can do things that we might not perceive ourselves to be capable of doing. So this is the whole idea behind why Beyonce performs as Sasha Fierce. I've heard that Adele does this also. So it's called the Batman effect because if you feel like there's something that you're trying to do, if you imagine how Batman would do it, then you can sort of take on Batman's qualities. Well, the way you can experiment with this with your audiation is, can you imagine singing that F major scale? Can you sing it, and in your mind, don't imitate, but in your mind as you sing, can you hear Dolly Parton singing it? Can you hear Maria Callas singing it? The point of this is not to imitate what their voices sound like, but just to give yourself something for your brain to hold on to rather than the ideal sound. If it's someone that you're familiar with and you know exactly how Bob Dylan sounds, right? I can hear very clearly in my brain what he sounds like, and I can actually imagine easily what his voice would sound like singing that F major scale. It doesn't matter that that's not the ideal that I'm trying to produce. It matters that it gives me something really easy to imagine that my brain can hold on to. So does that make sense? It doesn't have to be that you're imagining someone who's a better singer than you. It matters that it has to be something that you can really clearly imagine. So I recently was working on this technique in a lesson with a singer, and she sang the most beautiful Bach aria thinking about how Miss Piggy would sing it. And she did not sound one iota like Miss Piggy, but Miss Piggy has such a distinctive way of singing that it was easier for her to hold on to that mental representation of the sound rather than saying, how would this phrase go ideally? If you're trying to reach for that vague ideal, you may let your hearing of what you're actually singing in the world creep in. If you're listening to that very kind of fun and catchy idea of, I'm listening to Miss Piggy sing this aria, it gives your brain something to hold on to as you are working on this audiation skill. I should mention at this point that the idea of audiation and a lot of what I've learned about it has come through the world of brass players. So there was a very influential pedagogue, I believe his name was Arnold Jacobs, I think, starts with J. I'll put it here if that was incorrect. But he had a theory called song and wind. If you play a brass instrument, you've heard about this. And the idea was that as you play, you hear the song in your head and then you just supply the wind. That's a super simplification, but that's kind of where I first heard about this concept. If you want to know more about it, there's a really short and I think pretty well-written book by a trumpet teacher named Kristian Steenstrup. You can either hear the podcast that he did with Noah Kageyama on Noah's amazing Bulletproof musician podcast, but Kristian also wrote a book called Blow Your Mind, and it's like a little primer for brass players, and I think there's a really helpful explanation about how obsessing about technique can get in the way of performance, and some ideas about audiation. So if you want to learn more, that might be a good place to start. Okay, so now you are able to hold on to pitches, you're able to create other pitches, you're able to hear passages in your head, even more challenging passages so that you can execute them correctly, and you've even worked on the skill of being able to audiate simultaneously while making music. What happens next? Well, now you can start to integrate those skills. One of the things that I really love is when I see singers who are starting to not only hear their own part in a piece of music, but are starting to really conceive of the whole piece of music as the way it goes. This is how I really intuitively learned music as a kid. And, it's wonderful if the interludes between and the other parts and the whole sound, even like the kind of tonic atmosphere of a piece, is part of your mental concept. Each one of these things kind of not only strengthens your ability to perform, but also really enriches your experience. So maybe at this point, I'm not just singing my parts in Sicut Cervus, but really part of what I am hearing as my whole creation of the piece is those beautiful alto lines, and then how they seamlessly move into my lines and what the other parts are doing, and when the basses are singing along with the sopranos. It's wonderful to start to be able to have vocalizing and hearing be like on parallel and separate but connected tracks. So this starts to happen in rehearsal, in performance, as you move to this more advanced level. But I also want to talk now about performance anxiety. And this is probably the kind of biggest payoff that I've had with audiation. Prepare yourself to hear a very, very strange idea, but I am telling you it is one that really, really works and has made it possible for me to perform on stage and not feel like my whole life was falling apart every time I did it. So it was really powerful for me. I recommend it to you. I also learned this from Noah Kageyama. I will link below a podcast in which he talks about this technique on a jazz podcast. I'll link that below, but I would really recommend, if you are interested in this technique and also in working on performance anxiety in general, Noah's course, Performance Psychology Essentials, PPE, it's some of the best money I've ever spent. It really helped to bring me back from the brink of paralysis on stage. So I recommend that course to you, but here's one of the techniques that he talks about there and also on this free podcast. It is called Deaf Psychics. Okay, so stick with me. This is a really strange idea, but Once you are able to sing and simultaneously audiate, you can try this game called Deaf Psychics, where you imagine that anyone who can hear you, so the audience or the people you're singing in front of in class or your teacher, that they are deaf and can't hear the notes that are coming out of your mouth, but they're psychic, so they can hear what's going on in your head. So number one, if you are spending all your time on stage thinking, I look terrible in this dress, I don't know what I'm doing, I definitely should have practiced more, then your audience is receiving that psychically. So it really helps to kind of quell those thoughts, but also it means that you have to audiate as fully, as consistently, as sort of loudly as you can, because that is the way in which your audience is actually receiving the music from you. So it's really a trip because you almost stop hearing yourself out loud and really get so involved in this psychic performance that in my case, it has really helped to like sidestep that performance anxiety altogether, while still maintaining the element of performing and communicating with the audience. So just in the same way that I don't want you to like be audiating by holding onto your pitch and blocking everything else out, I also don't want you to have to white knuckle your way through performance by just executing your part and blocking everything out that's happening. But if you imagine that your audience, maybe even your colleagues on stage, that they can't hear you unless you are audiating your part, it really starts to become such a fun game and also a very freeing experience, because in your imagination, you have no technical limitations. You can do anything that you want. It can sound any old way you want. So try this game. It's really trippy, but the people who I've worked with who have tried it have absolutely loved it. I love it. I think it can really help you, especially if you struggle in performance. So that's what I have to tell you about audiation. As I heard someone say once, I have now told you more than I know. So that is everything. If you learned something, if you have something to share about your experience with audiation, if you're a brass player and you have learned about song and wind, I would love for you to share it in the comments. Also, let me know what you think of these long form videos. There are certainly topics on which I could go on at length. My assumption was always that you wanted these short little tidbits, but I would love to hear if you'd like a deep dive on something else. In the meanwhile, thank you especially today for your time, for singing with me. I really appreciate it. And good luck with this. I hope that you add this skill to your arsenal. Let me know how it goes. Keep up the practicing. If you want to hear from me before next Thursday, be sure to check out the link in the description box for the newsletter. It's free. It comes out every Friday. In the meanwhile, thank you for practicing.